Hello and welcome to Policy Beast. We are in the midst of our continuing series interviewing candidates for the 7th Middlesex House of Representatives State Office here in Massachusetts. And our guest tonight is none other than Yolanda Greaves, my fellow WACA co-host around the town, select woman, select person,
whatever works.
And she also has the dubious honor of being the only guest on The Beast who has appeared 3 times. So for that, thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. Yes, as I was thinking about us getting together this morning, I'm like, oh, I remember when I was her very first guest.
That's right. You were the first one on the program, so and now you're back, and we're very happy to have you back. But you're back under some very different circumstances,
yes,
and exciting circumstances.
Very exciting, yes.
So what are you up to?
So I have decided to run for the 7th Middlesex District State Representative seat, the one being vacated by Tom Sanacandro. I'm looking forward to the run and very excited about it, and looking forward to take the work that I've been doing here in Ashland and expanding it to Framingham and bringing it up to the State House.
Well, I'd like this to be an opportunity for folks in Ashland and even Framingham who may not be familiar with you.
Okay.
Those of us who are in Ashland, we know who you are.
Yep.
But, I just want to talk a little bit about some of your history in public service.
Sure.
Here in Ashland. So if you could fill us in on some of that, that would be great.
Sure. So I've been in Ashland since Memorial Day of 1990, and one of the very first public service things I did was on a space and enrollment committee. My oldest daughter was in kindergarten, and I was friendly with Claudia Bennett, who was then on the school committee, and they were doing a process where they were looking at the space issues going on in the schools at that point. So this was probably so she was my oldest was born in 94, so this was like in 1999, 2000.
Okay.
And Barry Ruthfeld was still our superintendent. They were looking at issues for the enrollment. The kindergarten class that went in was twice as big as the senior class that was graduating.
Oh, wow.
So that was 99 to 2000, so that school year.
Okay.
So my daughter was in that kindergarten class, and I was asked if I'd be interested in sitting on this committee to look at our schools, look at the space, look at the enrollment, and how we could possibly resolve our space issues. So that was probably about a 9 or 10 month process. And at the end of the process, it was decided that we should build a high school. So nothing was done at that point. Barry Ruthfeld stepped down. Other things were going on. Richard Hoffman was hired, and things were sort of put on hold. But I was still involved in, PTO, things like that. And then they decided that it would make sense to go forward with a building project.
Okay.
To build a high school. It was decided that was the best thing to do. So at the time I said, okay, well, I was part of the space and enrollment program, so I applied to be on the building committee to review all the possibilities of what to build, where to build it. Unfortunately, to me at the time, I did not get put on that committee.
All right.
But I did still stay involved and helped to get the building project passed. At the same time, Karen Spilka was on school committee. She ran for state rep. In November of that year, she won the election for state rep. I was still involved with the building project. And in May, her term was she had 2 more years in her term. She was stepping down, and because of the involvement I had a number of people say to me, you do really well on school committee. So at the election where the school building project lost by 28 votes, I was elected to the school committee for my first term.
Okay.
I then finished out that term, and that was 2 years, and then ran for re-election and did another full term. So I was on the school committee for 5 years. My last 2 years, it was interesting. My daughters had actually we had decided to move them to a private school, but I stayed on the school committee because I had made that commitment. And what I thought was interesting for me was I was able to really be there for all the kids because my own children were not in the schools. And then after at the end of my second term, there were a number of people who had stepped up and said, we're going to run for school committee. So I didn't feel like I had to run again.
Okay.
And I had made it known that at the end of that term, if there were other people who would be willing to run, it would be better because I was busy, you know, helping with my daughters.
Sure.
And then I was off of any committees. I would go to town meeting and I would still watch meetings and talk to people about what was going on. But I took about 5 years off from any elected positions.
Okay.
And then in fall of 2011, I had a couple of people say, you know, if you've considered running for selectman, and I had thought about it at that point.
I was going to say, like, what made you jump in?
So I had talked to people because I had thought that I wanted to get back involved. My girls were a little bit older at that point. I wanted to get back involved, and I had said to people, yeah, I'm considering running for selectman, but I was also involved with a statewide dance festival at the time, and I was the chair of the board of that festival. So I didn't know that I had the time to do that, plus I was working. But in fall of 2011, I had a couple people say to me, no, you know, if you were considering running, you should consider it this year.
Okay.
There was a lot going on in town, some police issues. So in January of 2012, after having talked about it with my family, I decided to run for Board of Selectmen. It was a very contested race. There were 7 people running in total. There were 5 of us running for 2 seats, and then 2 people running for a 1-year term. I soundly won that election. I was the most vote getters in that election. Stepped up to the Board of Selectmen, and it has been a learning process ever since.
Now, you were chairperson of the board.
Yeah,
for a little
after
bit,
my,
right?
so I was on for 1 year, and then I was the chair for 2 years in a row. We were going through a lot of transitions. Steve Mitchell, who had been the chair for a year, needed to step down. And it was decided that I would be the best person to step up, and it was right for me. So I stepped into the chair position after having only been on the board for 1 year. But I feel that the experience that I had on school committee and just being aware of what was going on in town and some of my other background allowed me to step into that role and help finish up the transitions with town manager and other things that were going on.
As a select person or a select woman, what were some of your proudest achievements as being part of the board? What were some of the things that you could point to and say, you know, wow, I'm really glad that I was part of that. I took some leadership on that.
I think one of the biggest things in our time was the transition to Tony Schiavi as our town manager. As I was elected, John Petrin was leaving, and Mark Purple was appointed the interim town manager. But very shortly we found out that Mark was getting ready to leave. He was offered the job in Southborough. And we decided that we were going to go through an election, a selection process. We worked with a consultant, and we created a selection committee. And then they brought us 3 candidates, and Tony was above and beyond the other 2 candidates. And he just made his background and what he could bring with what was going on in town, it was what we needed. So that is probably one of the biggest, the strongest and best accomplishments in regards to personnel. And then we fostered and worked with Tony and with Mike Herbert, and we've put a number of new fiscal policies in place. I think that has been. And then one of the other achievements, and this was something that I really drove, was I found that people wanted to be able to talk to members of the Board of Selectmen. And some people did, some previous boards had done coffee hours and things like that. But we had this new event in town called the Farmers Market.
Yes.
And the year that I was chair, I recommended to the rest of my board that we as selectmen go to the Farmers Market. So that second year of the Farmers Market, either I or one of my board members was at the Farmers Market pretty much every Saturday that second season. It was sometimes hard, but it was great. I got to talk to people. We got to hear feedback from people about the transition to our new town manager, how the transitions went. And then after that, I spoke to the board because I was then chair again. I said, you know, this would be a great opportunity not only for the Board of Selectmen, but for all the volunteer committees in Ashland to have time to talk to people in a casual way. So we took what was called the selectman tent,
Right.
and we turned it into the town tent.
Okay.
And the last 2 years, has it been 2 years? It all blends together. We have reached out, and other committees now go to the town tent on Saturdays. So you could go, and there could be members from the FinCom or Historical Society or CPA. We've had Medical Reserve there, and it's been a great time. I love going to the farmers market because it's a great way to talk to people in a very casual way.
Sure.
And they can bring up things. There's no cameras. It's just the conversation, a very personal conversation.
Right.
So that has been an initiative that I feel very proud about. And the people who run the farmers market are so pleased that the town is there and these committees are there supporting and working with them.
I think it definitely provides a more casual environment. I think people
Yeah.
can be intimidated sometimes, just to ask a question of some of their lawmakers, or even
Right.
finding out like what kind of committees are in town and how to get
Right.
involved. It can
Right.
be kind of monolithic. People feel kind of monolithic about that thing.
Yeah.
So, but when you bring it down to the farmers market, everybody loves the farmers market.
Exactly. There's always
know,
music. There's
right.
always good food.
Right.
The weather, fortunately, the last couple of years has been pretty good. On it's a Saturday morning, you spend a couple of hours, and you get to do a lot of fun things as well as talk to your elected officials.
It's very approachable.
Yeah.
Very approachable.
Yep.
So after serving on the Board of Selectmen, what precipitated your decision to run for this seat?
So there was a couple things. First of all, with Tom Santacandro announcing that he was not running for re-election, I had the opportunity to spend some time with Tom on school committee, and I felt that he was doing a very good job. I had originally never seen myself running for state rep. But it was one of those things where when he decided he wasn't going to run, it made it an open seat. And I thought to myself, okay, it's an open seat, so I'm not running against someone who I respect. And I felt that it was an opportunity for me to take the work that I'd been doing here in Ashland and being able to expand it into Framingham and go bring it to the State House. I feel I use common sense as I make decisions. I'm a fiscal conservative who is looking out for how our tax dollars are being spent. And I want to be able to take what I've done for Ashland and take it up that next level.
Well, let's talk about that next level. So,
Okay.
you've touched upon a lot of things that you've been involved with policy-wise in Ashland.
Yep.
As we've been doing our Meet the Candidates series, I've been asking all the candidates about some of their top 2 or 3 public policy issues that they care very deeply about, that they'd like to have the opportunity to spend some time on if they were elected to the seat.
Right.
So. Let's start there. What would be your number 1 issue at this point? What are you most concerned about, and where do you think you could make the most impact? Or is that a separate question for you?
It's been interesting because when I read your questions and I was thinking about that, and I've been following other people's campaigns and just thinking about this. When I ran for school committee, I didn't have one particular thing that I said, this is why I'm running for school committee.
Right.
Except for the interest of all the students. And when I ran for selectman, it was a similar kind of thing. It wasn't that I was running for a selectman to take care of one issue. I felt that I was going to be able to go, look at what was going on, and address things as they came up. And as I was thinking about your question, and certainly there's a lot of major issues. The opiate crisis that is going on
Absolutely.
is a big issue. School funding for Ashland and and for Framingham. How Chapter 70 is decided, the charter school funding is a convoluted thing. So those are all things I'd like to work on. But for me, there's not one burning issue that I'm going to go to the State House and say, this is what I'm going to focus on. Because I think there is so much work that needs to be done that I don't want to be a one-issue candidate. I want to be able to go and, I think about the opiate crisis. It's been going on for a while.
Right.
And I had the opportunity to speak to Chief Davis about it here in Ashland. And I would hope that come November, we're much further along in the process than we are now. So that when I get there, I'm sure there'll still be work that needs to be done.
Sure.
But certainly not the kind of work that they need to be doing right now.
Well, Board of Selectmen and other folks, in town have been working diligently on education on this issue. I don't know how much you'd like to speak to some of the town's efforts on that.
It's been, I can still remember before I was even on school committee, there was a school committee member, and his name was Harry Henshey. And his biggest thing was the Chapter 70 formula and how Ashland was getting a disproportionate amount of funds. And it was interesting as I started learning. I remember going to an event with other, when I was on school committee, other representatives from around the state, and just talking to Karen Spilka when she got to the State House, and how for one community to get more funds, another community may have to lose funds.
Right.
So for the formula to be revised, there always has to be more money put into it so that the people who are getting more don't feel like they're losing something.
Sure.
So that is something that definitely needs to be looked at. We should look at how we're funding our special education costs. Circuit breaker is a great idea, but it only applies to...
Can you explain to folks, part of the mission of the show,
Okay.
as you are well aware,
as I know.
Is to sort of break these sort of policy issues down. And I think we have a tendency, those of us who are
in the know.
Who are in the know, are little policy wonks and, kind of do, we know what some of these terms mean. But for someone who's just turning in, who's trying to learn about the process, we want to make this approachable for people. So you're talking about circuit breakers. I'm thinking about my house.
Right.
I don't think that's what you're referring to.
No. So there's different ways that our education in Massachusetts gets funded, and it gets targeted toward different areas. So Chapter 70 is this formula that gets used to figure out how much each town is going to get per pupil.
Right.
Then there's this program called Circuit Breaker, and it relates to special education funding. But it relates to special education funding for students that have to go outside of your district. So you have a student, and because of their needs, you can't meet them within your district. They have to go to a special school or a special program. So Circuit Breaker reimburses after the first $40,000. So for some of these out-of-district placements, we might be paying $100,000 for a student.
Okay.
So Circuit Breaker says, okay, community, you're paying the first $40,000, and then we'll start kicking in what's called Circuit Breaker. But you don't get the full other $60,000 because it's based on the budget and how much is available. So one year, you might get 38% of those costs. Another year, you might get 27% of those costs. Another year, you might get 49% of those costs. So it's a moving target. And I just, should I make it to the State House, and I hope I do, there needs to be different dialogue about how we fund our education. Another program is how we reimburse for charter schools. I think charter schools are great. As someone who supports the arts and thinks that more students should be able to have education related to the things they want to do, there's a great arts charter school in Boston, there's a great arts charter school in the Pioneer Valley. But what happens is charter schools get to set their budget. They're not constricted by the 2.5 or whatever is in the town, it was in a specific town budget.
Right.
So they set their budget, and then our cherry sheet, which is the sheet that says how much we're getting from the state for different reimbursements, money that they're giving us and then subtracting. The charter school says this is our budget, this is our per pupil cost, so the sending community has to pay that per pupil cost. And it's, there's all kinds of other things that are involved, but that's the very basic way to look at it. Well, that per pupil cost could be higher than what we're spending per pupil here in Ashland. But because that's their budget, and they don't have to worry about the 2.5% or overrides or anything like that, so we could be spending, and these are not exact numbers, I don't have the exact numbers. Let's say we spend $11,000 on average per pupil here in Ashland, and that's not the exact number.
I think that's important to state.
It's very, I want to state that. But if we have students going to charter schools, we might be having to pay $14,000 per student. And again, not exact numbers, but it's that kind of difference.
Yeah.
So if you have that difference of 3 or 4 or 2, whatever it is, you have 20 students going there, that could be the difference of an aide or half of a teacher's salary.
Sure.
And it impacts our funding. And Ashland as a community has always had the Chapter 70 funding has been much less. And it has impacted what we can do, which is why as a community we're looking at a Proposition 2.5 override.
Yeah.
Right.
At the top of the interview,
Yep.
you we slow down a little bit. You talked about part of the reason why you want to run for this seat is because you want to sort of think of ways that some of the things that you've done in Ashland, you want to bring them to Framingham. What are some of the things that you've initiated in Ashland that you feel that your folks in Framingham could benefit from?
Well, should I be the state rep, I would make myself available to the citizens. I'd go to different events and get out as much as possible to hear their concerns. Just the way I look at things, the way I make decisions, I use common sense, I look at all the information, I weigh the options, and I think that if I'm the state rep, I can do that for everyone in our district. Mm-hmm. So using that common sense way of looking at things, and I have, I have a background that's very varied.
Well, I was going to ask you how you feel your professional experience and what is your
right.
Well, not to say that being on the board of selectmen isn't professional, but
right.
your 9 to 5, I guess, experience informs how you approach your public service experience.
Right. So I have an arts background. I actually have a BFA in dance from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. But upon graduation, I saw that there were things that my husband and I, we were engaged at the time, wanted to do, and I got into business. I worked for the Gillette Company for about 7 or 8 years, working in their customer service. And the last 22 years, my husband and a partner of his have their own software company, and I've been doing I do all the HR and finance for the company.
Okay.
So from a standpoint of knowing what small businesses need and what kinds of things that the state can impact to impact what a small business and how a small business does. And being able to say, okay, small business is what drives America. Even though you hear about all the big companies and what they do, small business and people who can add a job here or add a job there employ a lot of the people in Massachusetts and in the United States. So understanding what small business needs, the kind of support or non-regulation that it needs from the state level, I think I can take that background and bring it up to the state level and then turn it around and help the small businesses in our district and across the state.
Okay. Indeed, small business. It's well proven that small businesses are really the economic engine that drive our economy here. Although people don't immediately think of it as such.
Right.
So that's an important issue, an important approach. But one thing that we did talk a little bit about, and you did mention the opioid crisis, and I just want to loop back because I was going to ask you about the Chapter 70 stuff, but I think you were referring to hopefully by the time you be elected, there'd be certain things in place that we would make more progress.
Right.
My question to you is, currently right now, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. As you're running for office and as you're letting people know what your views are, could you let us know about some of the improvements, some of the things that you'd like to see insofar as tackling this horrible, insidious crisis in communities, not just in Ashland and Framingham, but really across the Commonwealth and across the nation?
It is a crisis. A lot of times you hear people say different things and you go, well, no, that's not really an emergency, or this is a crisis. And I think a big part of it has to be education and letting people know that it can happen the first time.
Right.
And also looking at how we can support people once they've been identified as having issues, whether it's mental health assistance or detox programs, or how can we get that involved in our in how we're handling this? I had a great conversation with our police chief, Davis, and they're the first responders, and they want to let people know, and I support this, that if you're with somebody and they have an OD and they've stopped breathing, call the police, call the fire department, and know that they're not going to judge you. And I think that's very important. We need to make sure that if people are having issues, they're getting the help they need. I think at the state level, the program of making the Narcan available in bulk purchasing so that it's not as expensive, so that it's available to our police and our fire departments so that they can do something when they're first responders. I think that's a great program. We need to make sure that that continues. Continuing the education programs and seeing how we can get people the help they need once they've been identified, and letting families know that if you identify someone, if you see someone having a crisis and having issues with substance abuse, let's get them help. And we have programs in place, and there's health insurance. People have health insurance. Use those tools that are available.
Right. So, I have been accused of being the Andy Reid of clock management here at WACA. It looks like I'm living up to my reputation. So, saying that, we are running very short on time, but I did want to ask you the question I've been asking all of the folks I've been sitting down here with.
Okay.
If you had to give one reason as to why someone should vote for Yolanda Greaves for the seat, what would it be?
My experience and public service to my community has prepared me to give even more public service to more citizens and help out at a higher level. So and I guess I'm going to add a second one, just I use common sense and when I'm making decisions. And I think that's important as we look at how we make laws and rules and look at our finances. It has to be common sense.
Yolanda, do you have a website?
I do. It's yolandagreaves.com.
Okay.
Spelled out. They can go to the website. It's updated with information about me, and if they want to get involved, which we'd love to have people get involved and help out. I've already pulled my papers. I went to the state and the Secretary of Commonwealth and picked up my paperwork. I'm in the process of getting signatures. Hope to get those turned back in very quickly. I'm very serious about running for this seat. I want to represent Ashland and Framingham and just be the voice of people and reason moving forward.
I think we're going to end it right there, Yolanda.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Policy Beast once again. And thank you again. Yolanda Greaves is running for the 7th Middlesex seat for House of Representatives in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You can find out more about her candidacy at yolandagreaves.com. And you can find out more about the candidates here on Policy Beast as we continue our Meet the Candidates series until election time. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing you again right here on Policy Beast. We'd love to hear from you here at Policy Beast, and there are a lot of ways to get in touch with us. You can follow us on Twitter at POLICYBEASTTV. We have a Facebook fan page. Look us up on Facebook. You can also email us at POLICYBEASTTV@gmail.com. So many ways to get in touch, and we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear about any kind of show ideas or any kind of topics that you'd like us to dive deep into.